Welcome to Paskvan Podcasts. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps this channel. Today we're going to explore what happens when security doesn't just fray, but is completely shredded overnight. I want you to imagine a small, quiet town, early 20th century, a place that's just defined by trust, by routine, and then one single inexplicable event shatters everything.
Everything.
And this isn't just about the initial calamity. This is about how that fear, when it's left to fester, it can migrate. It attaches itself to the most innocent of places and turns them into something else entirely.
And the setting for this is Villisca, Iowa. To really get the impact of what happened, you first have to understand Villisca itself in 1912.
Okay.
It was, by all accounts, just utterly stable, predictable. It's a community surrounded by rolling farmland. Its lifeblood was really the railroad line that came through.
So a pretty standard Midwestern town for the time.
Exactly. It was a place where people knew each other, not just by sight, but by family history. The records paint this picture of a society where doors were just left unlocked.
Wow. That alone tells you everything you need to know about the level of trust there.
It's a powerful symbol, and within that town, the schoolhouse was maybe the most important symbol of all.
The symbol of safety.
Precisely. It was order. It was the promise of a future for their kids. The whole foundation of that building was really parental trust.
So our mission today it's a bit complex. We have to first unpack the details of the terrible event on June 9th, 1912, the event that just obliterated that trust. And then we're going to track how that terror moves, how this collective anxiety breaks free from one house and attaches itself to the town's most vulnerable symbol, the schoolhouse. This is, it's really a deep look at what happens when a community never ever gets closure.
They were forced to live with a phantom, a threat they could never see, never name, and never neutralize.
So, before that night, life in Villisca was just defined by this profound, almost subconscious safety. Let's really get into that. What did it actually look like day to day?
The routine was everything. It was the bedrock of the community. Life was organized by, the farming calendar and the train schedule.
Planting, harvesting, the whistle of the train.
Exactly. Church on Sundays, school during the week. The community was mostly respectable farmers, railroad guys, shopkeepers. It wasn't a rich place, but it was stable. And stability was valued above everything else.
And that stability, it was personal too, right? You said everyone knew each other.
Deeply personal. There were really no strangers. The few travelers who came through, peddlers, preachers, they would have stood out immediately. They weren't part of the fabric.
So that profound sense of security, it was just the air they breathed.
It was. Kids walked to school by themselves. That wasn't a convenience. It was just the norm. It was rooted in this deep belief that the environment itself, the town, was safe.
And the schoolhouse anchored all of that. A simple wooden building full of noise and life. A place where parents just knew their kids would come home safe at the end of the day.
It was the town's collective belief in itself made physical.
That trust, that inherent belief, that's what makes what happened on June 9th so completely destructive, isn't it?
It's the core of it. Their entire worldview was built on the idea that indiscriminate, unmotivated acts of destruction simply didn't happen in Villisca. And that night proved they did. And that they could strike the most well-liked, established family in town.
On the night of June 9th, 1912, the unthinkable happened. It involved the Moore family, a respected, pretty well-off household.
Right. Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 young girls, Ina and Lena Stillinger, who were just staying the night as guests.
So 8 people in total.
8 people. An entire household just erased. And Josiah Moore was a prosperous guy, an implement dealer. He was well-known. The fact that it was them, a prominent, seemingly safe family, that just amplified the terror.
The sources on the investigation, they really highlight how methodical the whole operation was.
Chillingly so. The perpetrator moved with this awful efficiency and silence. The victims were all struck with an axe, mostly while they were sound asleep.
Meaning they likely never knew what was happening, no chance to fight or even cry out.
The silence of it is what defines it. And let's get into the specifics of the scene, because they suggest a kind of awareness that goes beyond simple rage.
Oh, yeah.
After the axe, the assailant covered the faces of every victim, used bedclothes, garments, whatever was there, and then every curtain in the house was drawn tight.
Hiding the interior from the outside world.
Yes. And then there's this next detail, which is maybe the most unsettling of all.
The mirrors?
The mirrors were obscured. A large mirror downstairs was covered with a skirt. Another one was draped.
Why do that? I mean, that detail has always stuck with me. What is the theory there?
It's generated so much discussion. Was it superstition? An old belief about not letting a reflection be seen after a demise? Was it symbolic? Or was it just a way to plunge the whole house into a deeper, more complete darkness?
Whatever the reason, it suggests a level of control, premeditation.
Absolutely. And crucially, there was no clear motive. You look for one, and it just isn't there. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong, a pocketbook, jewelry, all left untouched.
And no forced entry.
None. So it wasn't a clear crime of passion either, where you could immediately point to a rival or a spouse. It was devoid of logic. And that makes it so much more terrifying.
The implement itself.
An axe, yes, believed to belong to Josiah Moore himself.
So the killer used what was already there.
Which suggests they didn't want the risk of being seen carrying one into town. It just adds another layer of grim, calculated detail.
And this is where the procedural breakdown begins.
Yeah.
Discovery is made the next morning, word spreads like wildfire, and the town's reaction. It actually cripples the investigation from the start.
Almost immediately. I mean, you have to understand, there weren't modern police procedures. The crime scene was just compromised. Townspeople, reporters, the morbidly curious, they all just descended on the house.
Walking through, touching things, any potential clues just trampled and lost.
Exactly. The town's own chaotic response was, in a way, a second assault on the possibility of ever finding justice.
And the societal impact must have been instant.
Oh, profound. The event was just inexplicable. The analysis of the town's state at the time shows this universal fear, all summarized by one terrifying thought. If this could happen to the Moores, it can happen to anyone.
That just dissolves all trust.
Instantly. And it created this permanent internal shift. You see this dramatic overnight change in behavior. Doors that had always been open were suddenly locked, bolted, barricaded.
Kids weren't allowed to play outside anymore.
No, parents accompanied them everywhere, and some people just left town. They were worried the attacker was still there, walking among them.
Or that the town itself was somehow cursed.
And the worst part, really, was the fracturing of trust between neighbors. When the danger has no name and no face, the threat becomes internal. Everyone started looking at everyone else with suspicion. That foundation of small-town safety just collapsed.
So the town is in a full-blown panic. The authorities have a compromised scene, no motive. The investigation that follows just seems to make everything worse.
It spanned decades, and yes, it really only compounded the problem. It was prolonged, chaotic, frustrating. It was kept alive by the sheer horror of what happened, but it never delivered any answers.
And this constant drawn-out process just keeps the trauma fresh in everyone's minds.
Exactly. It offered no comfort, just more questions.
Let's talk about the suspects they pursued, because it really shows how desperate they were to find some kind of narrative that made sense.
The list is long, but three figures really dominated the headlines. First, there was a man named Reverend George Kelly. He was a traveling English minister.
A transient, an outsider.
Yes, and he had been in Villisca the night of the event. He was a deeply troubled man, known history of psychological instability, and he had this admitted obsession with violent imagery. And, unsettlingly, with young girls.
So he seems like a prime suspect.
He was, especially because he later confessed. But the confession itself was always suspect. It was obtained years later under some dubious circumstances, and it was filled with unreliable details.
Well, it didn't hold up.
When it went to trial, the defense argued it was coerced, that he was mentally unstable. The result was a hung jury and then an acquittal in the next trial. So, nothing.
Okay, who was next?
Next was a local, a businessman named Frank Jones. He was Josiah Moore's direct competitor in the farm implement business.
Ah, so a potential motive there, financial or personal revenge.
That was the theory. It revolved around business rivalry, maybe even a rumored affair, but the connection was always tenuous.
What was the problem with him as a suspect?
He had a strong alibi, and there was never any direct evidence that put him in that house. But the suspicion, it just lingered for decades. And the fact that people thought it could be him, a known local, that just further poisoned the community trust.
If you could be the man next door, then you're truly not safe anywhere.
Exactly. And finally, there was William Mansfield, a former state senator. He became a suspect because of a string of similar unsolved assaults across the Midwest.
So the theory was a traveling serial assailant.
Yes. Someone using the rail lines to move between towns, committing these acts with the same modus operandi. And acts victims attacked in their sleep.
That seems plausible. What happened with him?
He was charged, put on trial, but he was also acquitted. Key witnesses who claimed to have seen him near Villisca that night turned out to be unreliable, or they recanted their stories.
So it's the same pattern over and over.
Yes. Confessions that get dismissed, circumstantial evidence, trials that end with no conviction, just failure after failure.
And this constant cycle of hope and then disappointment must have just left this permanent scar.
It did. The case grew colder, the physical evidence faded, but the emotional temperature in Villisca just stayed high.
There's a line in the records that I found powerful. It said the fear settled like a fog over the town.
That's a perfect description. Villisca stopped being known for its farms or its railroad. It became known internationally for this one singular, unresolved tragedy.
And that lack of closure, that's the real core of the trauma, isn't it?
It is the absolute center. The perpetrator was never named, the reason was never understood, so the trauma had nowhere to go. It couldn't be processed and put in the past. It just festered.
And the Morehouse itself became this grim, physical landmark of that failure.
A constant reminder. A place people avoided or stared at from a distance. The town's subconscious scar refusing to heal because the story was never finished.
But the trauma couldn't be contained in just one house forever.
No. That intense focusing on the house eventually becomes psychologically exhausting, and this is where you start to see the stain begin to migrate.
It spreads from the private home to the public spaces.
And the schoolhouse, just blocks away from the Moore residence, was the most logical and most vulnerable next site. It was the physical location of the town's future. Its children.
The one place that absolutely had to feel safe.
Exactly. And once that fundamental feeling of safety was gone, the schoolhouse, which had always been a place of comfort, started to feel different.
Teachers started noticing changes in the students.
Subtle but deeply concerning things. A heightened anxiety that wasn't there before. The records mentioned children having frequent nightmares, being easily startled by ordinary noises, a constant state of hypervigilance.
So the tragedy didn't just leave a stain on a house. It left an impression on the entire town's psyche.
And the schoolhouse, as the primary place of innocence and daily community life, it just absorbed that narrative of fear and vulnerability.
The original social contract, that your kids are safe here, had been violently broken. So the schoolhouse, a place that demands that trust every single day, became part of that story of vulnerability.
It became the place where all the unresolved questions finally settled.
So after that summer of 1912, the town makes this big effort to get back to normal. School resumes, the bell rings.
A forced routine. They were trying to self-medicate the trauma by just going through the motions.
But it didn't work. The teachers, the older students, they described the atmosphere inside as heavier.
Yes, as if the building itself was carrying some invisible weight. And the environmental accounts are consistent on this. Certain rooms felt strangely colder, even when the heating was on.
And the sounds of the building changed.
Or at least the perception of them did. Ordinary noises, the creaks of wood, chairs shifting, they suddenly seemed amplified, unnatural in the quiet moments. It suggests that collective anxiety had replaced any sense of relaxation with this constant hypervigilance.
The familiar sounds became menacing.
Right, and that's a crucial point. This wasn't some dramatic, overt event at first. The disruption was subtle. It just felt profoundly wrong to the people who knew that building best. They knew its normal sounds, and this was a deviation.
So what were some of the first specific things people started reporting?
The earliest and most consistent phenomena came from the students themselves. Mostly auditory and visual things that you couldn't easily confirm.
Like what?
Children complained of hearing soft whispers when no one was talking, or hearing their names being called softly from empty hallways.
Hearing your own name. That's incredibly unnerving. It's personal.
It is. It suggests personalized attention from something you can't see. And then there were the visual things, equally ambiguous.
Shadows.
Shadows, yes. Students described seeing shadows move along the walls in their peripheral vision, and when they'd turned to look, there was nothing there. It's that classic anomaly that makes you question your own senses.
And the behavior that came from this is maybe the most compelling evidence.
I think so. Children started refusing to be alone in the classrooms.
So a teacher would step out for a minute.
And come back to find a small group of students huddled together by the door, completely spooked, insisting someone or something had been in the room with them.
And this wasn't just a one-off thing.
It was a pattern. And it reinforced the building's growing reputation. There are also accounts of doors being found open after they'd just been shut, or the sound of distinct footsteps overhead when the attic was known to be empty.
But what seems to define this whole early period is one common claim. It felt like someone was watching.
That is the central feeling. that sensation of constant unseen surveillance. Teachers reported feeling someone standing right behind them, close enough to feel a presence, but they'd turn and nothing.
Others heard footsteps pacing outside their classroom doors after school.
Yes, long after everyone should have been gone. And it's important to stress the historical accounts are clear on this. No one reported seeing a full apparition in those early years.
It wasn't a ghost story yet.
No. It was an experience defined by a lingering presence, an awareness of something that did not belong, subtle enough to make you doubt yourself, but persistent enough to implant fear.
So this takes us into the analytical part. If it wasn't apparitions, what was happening here?
This is where we have to talk about collective trauma. When a severe event like this happens, especially without resolution, that fear doesn't just go away. The mind, both individual and collective, is desperate to find patterns, to find a place to attach that terror.
So if it can't find a human culprit, the fear itself migrates.
It attaches itself to vulnerable, significant places, and the schoolhouse was the perfect psychological container for that fear.
Because it represented innocence, vulnerability, and a trust that had already been broken.
Absolutely. The building almost became a symbolic scapegoat. It was easier for the town's psyche to believe the place was wrong or touched than to accept the horror that the real threat was unseen, unnamed, and maybe still living among them.
And that's how the oral tradition starts. The stories get passed down.
Not as official records, but as shared memories. As warnings. A teacher telling another about the footsteps, a student telling a parent about the whispers. And each story layers on top of the last, until the schoolhouse has this undeniable, enduring reputation.
So as the decades go by, the schoolhouse's role changes. It eventually closes, right?
Yeah.
But not because of these stories.
That's right. It closed due to school consolidation in the region. And it sat empty for a while. Silent. But the interest in the 1912 event never really went away.
No, in fact, it resurfaced decades later. Books, true crime shows, they brought the story back into the public eye, and that attention naturally shifted back to Villisca.
And the stories that were once just local whispers about the schoolhouse.
Now they found a much wider audience. The building's local reputation for feeling strange solidified into a full-blown paranormal narrative. And that inevitably brought outsiders.
The paranormal investigator.
The investigators, yes. The research teams, the hobbyists. And they brought specialized equipment that added a new technical layer to the old folklore.
Cameras, audio recorders, all of it.
Basically. They came either convinced they'd find something or determined to debunk the old stories once and for all.
And what they documented just added more layers to the mystery. Let's start with the audio evidence, because that seems to line up with the original claims.
It does. The most frequently documented phenomena were disembodied voices, what are often called electronic voice phenomena, or EVP.
Okay, can you define that for us? What exactly is an EVP?
It's a sound found on an electronic recording digital file, old tape, that sounds like speech or a whisper or an emotional sound, but that was not audible to the human ear when the recording was being made.
So they're capturing sounds on the equipment that they aren't hearing in the room.
Correct. And investigators claim to capture these repeatedly. Soft murmurs, sometimes what sounded like names, faint laughter, or crying. And the striking thing is, these were often captured when the room was verifiably silent.
Wow. Beyond the audio, there are reports of things actually moving. Kinetic activity.
Yes, equally persistent and unnerving. Things like chairs shifting slightly on their own, doors opening or closing with no draft, small items on desks found moved.
I read one account about chalk pieces.
Yes, small pieces of chalk found on the floor after being placed securely on a high shelf or ledge, and some people claim to have witnessed movement in real time, a door swinging shut in a still hallway or feeling a tug on their clothing.
We also have to talk about the thermal anomalies, the cold spots.
Investigators documented these frequently. Sudden, localized drops in temperature that couldn't be explained by drafts or anything environmental.
And what makes those claims compelling is that they're often in the same places, right?
Repeatedly. The same corners, the same desks, across multiple investigations. That suggests a fixed point of activity, not just a random draft.
And then there are the sounds tied to the building's purpose.
Which are deeply evocative. Footsteps in empty halls. The creak of floorboards overhead when no one is upstairs. The brief, unmistakable sound of children running or playing, immediately followed by total silence.
There are even reports of a school bell ringing.
Yes, when no bell was physically present or being rung.
The technical data is one thing, but the emotional quality of some of these claims, that seems to be the most impactful part.
It is. The most unsettling reports are things like high-pitched giggles echoing in an empty room, or a faint, persistent sobbing sound late at night.
And these sounds would trigger a strong emotional reaction in the people who heard them.
Sudden, intense feelings, deep sadness, overwhelming dread, short fear, even in people who came in as total skeptics. The emotional response was often way out of proportion to the sound itself.
And there are also the claims of being touched.
Lightly, yes, on the arm or shoulder. Not aggressive, just
Right.
noticeable. A non-visual confirmation of the presence they already felt.
So the common finding really seems to be that investigators who arrived skeptical rarely left indifferent.
They often left unconvinced but deeply unsettled, or even profoundly shaken. The schoolhouse just seemed to refuse neutrality. It demanded a visceral reaction.
The consistency of these reports across decades by different people with different equipment, it suggests that something is happening there.
Exactly. Even if the root cause isn't supernatural, the effect, the memorable disruption, the emotional response, it seems to be undeniable and repeatable.
So as the schoolhouse got more famous, it becomes really important to look at this critically. We have to present the other side of the coin, the skeptical viewpoint.
Absolutely. And there are powerful, rational explanations for these experiences, grounded in psychology and the environment.
So first, there's the power of suggestion.
Right. If you go to a place that's famous for being haunted, you are primed to interpret any ambiguous sound or feeling as confirmation of that. The town's fear memory, the whole traumatic history, it sets you up for that expectation.
And that idea of memory reshaping perception is key. The original teachers and students, could they have just been projecting their anxiety onto ordinary school sounds? A creak becomes a footstep.
It's a very strong psychological explanation. The brain is a pattern-finding machine, and it will find them even where they don't exist, especially to cope with unresolved tension.
Then there are the environmental factors. I mean, it's a 100-year-old wooden building.
Old buildings make noise. It's a fact. Wood expands and contracts. There are drafts, temperature fluctuations. These are all normal.
And we should talk about the technical explanations, like infrasound.
Yes. Infrasound is a really compelling physical mechanism for those generalized feelings of dread. It refers to low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing.
And these can be generated by things like wind or even distant machinery.
Exactly. And when you're exposed to these frequencies, they can cause anxiety, a feeling of pressure on your chest, and they can even cause your eyeballs to vibrate slightly.
And that eye vibration can lead to visual distortions.
The very experience of seeing shadows moving in your peripheral vision, if a building is constantly exposed to infrasound, it could reliably induce physiological stress and the feeling of a presence with no supernatural cause at all.
Okay, so we have these very strong counter explanations. But there are specific things that still trouble researchers, right? Things that prevent the schoolhouse from being so easily dismissed.
There are. The first is just the sheer consistency of the phenomena across generations. The same types of events were reported by students in 1913 and by ghost hunters 90 years later.
And that consistency holds even after the building was empty for years.
Suggesting the experience is tied to the location itself, not just the people remembering the tragedy.
And the clustering. Why do the cold spots and the footsteps happen in the same specific areas over and over? If it was just random noise or infrasound, you'd expect the experiences to be more spread out.
That's a difficult point to explain away. And then there's that profound emotional reaction we talked about. Skeptics, prepared to dismiss everything, still reported these intense, visceral feelings of dread or sadness that they just could not explain.
And the inconsistency is also strange. Some investigators feel absolutely nothing, while others, minutes later, are deeply affected.
Right. The schoolhouse seems to resist easy categorization. It offers atmosphere, presence, subtle disruption, but not the clear, definitive evidence that skeptics demand or the dramatic show that enthusiasts might hope for.
It's like the building itself embodies the failure to find a clear answer.
In a way, yes. It holds an impression, but it refuses to give up a name, a reason, or a neat scientific definition for the feeling it produces.
This brings us to a really complex ethical problem that the town faced when the schoolhouse became a tourist attraction.
The visitors brought money, which was needed. But that money came with a moral cost.
Is it right to profit from a tragedy? To commodify the grief of the Moore family?
That's the question. You have to contrast the two views. On one hand, there are people who believe that preserving the site, even if it's monetized, is better than letting the history be forgotten.
They see it as maintaining a historical record.
But on the other hand, many feel that turning it into an attraction where you pay to wait for whispers, that's turning profound suffering into a spectacle. These were real people. The question is, are we honoring the memory or are we consuming the horror?
When you look at other sites tied to unresolved trauma prisons, battlefields, there's a common thread that's not necessarily supernatural.
The common thread is the absence of justice, the absence of closure. That unresolved story creates this fertile ground for memory and belief and fear to embed themselves into a place. The building becomes an active participant in this story because the story never ended.
So after tracking all of this, what is the final analysis? Is the schoolhouse holding the emotional residue of a town that never healed? Or did something else take root there?
I think the final analysis has to lean on the human element. The building became this powerful, necessary symbol. It became a container for all the unresolved grief the town couldn't process. The structure just absorbed the town's fear and anxiety the way wood absorbs sound.
Places remember because people remember. And that collective memory, passed down, transforms the environment. The schoolhouse, built to be a place of promise, now holds generations of shared trauma. And that transforms it into a place of profound, persistent unease.
You know, whether one believes the Villisca schoolhouse is haunted by spirits or simply by history, the undeniable fact is that the building, it refuses to be silent. It speaks through its creaking floors, its whispered stories. It speaks through the visceral discomfort people feel standing alone in its empty rooms.
It's a persistent reminder.
A powerful one. That history, when it's left unresolved, it doesn't just fade away quietly. It actively seeks out a vessel to continue its narrative.
And the real question that comes out of all this isn't just what walks the halls, whether it's sound waves or trauma or something unknown. The deeper question is whether we're willing to listen to what the place is really telling us.
Which is?
That unresolved grief has this strange physical persistence. And some places, marked by tragedy and a failure of justice, they just carry their stories forward, regardless of our desperate need for closure. The schoolhouse holds the trauma, and by doing that, it forces the town and all of us to forever remember the cost of that silent night. Thank you for joining us as we explored this quiet corner of Iowa and the enduring echoes of a destruction that changed everything. We encourage you to consider which of the accounts, psychological, environmental, or something else entirely, you find most compelling when reflecting on the Villisca schoolhouse.